This week, we're talking about authenticity and privacy.
You are listening to Love Your Job Before You Leave It, the podcast for ambitious, high-achieving women who are ready to stop feeling stressed about work and kiss burnout goodbye forever. Whether you're starting a business or staying in your day job, this show will give you the coaching and guidance you need to start loving your work today. Here's your host, career coach Corey Lynn.
Hey, y'all. How are you doing today? I hope you're having a glorious Wednesday. I'm having a good day and a pretty good week. This last weekend, I got to go on a beautiful nature walk with some newish Sacramento friends who I'm really enjoying. And then we went out for lunch afterwards and we had amazing Mexican food. It was so delicious. And I just feel really nourished and delighted by that. I have been working hard to build a community over the last few years since I've moved here. And it's so fun that it's working, right? It's happening. It's coming together. And to be fair, it's been coming together the whole time. But today, right now, this week, at this moment in my life, I'm just feeling really pleased about it and really proud of myself and really cozy and connected to these people that I've met and made friends with and built relationships with. And of course, let me also take a moment to say, caveat, when I say I've worked hard, it's true in that I've put myself out there and I've been on Bumble BFF and I've gone on the Bumble BFF friend dates and I've done that and I've followed up and da-da-da. And also a big part of being consistent is not fucking doing shit on whatever the thing is you're trying to be consistent on. So there's been also big chunks of time where I haven't worked on it. And there's been chunks of time where I've laid on the floor and cried about how much I miss my Seattle friends. And there have been so many times when I've questioned what the fuck was I doing? Moving states to somewhere I've never lived and setting up, my friend community, not totally from the ground up because I did already have a few Sacramento friends, but sort of closer to the ground up. So I just wanted to say that and give you a little behind the scenes because I think sometimes it can be easy to look at somebody who's succeeding or doing something and be oh, she's so consistent and she's always positive about it. And she's confident. She's so kind to herself all the time. And the reality is sometimes, and also the behind the scenes is I'm obviously a human being also. And the things I teach on the podcast, I think they're so helpful. I think they're beautiful concepts and they have truly changed my fucking life. And also, I just want y'all to know deeply, deeply, deeply that I'm not over here doing them perfectly. I'm over here thrashing around through my life, trying to make it into something beautiful and meaningful for me. And a lot of the things that I come talk to y'all about, it's because something's not been working in my life for a long ass time. And I spend a lot of time thinking about it and writing about it. And then I have an insight and then I come share it with you. Obviously, a lot of this stuff from the podcast also is I'm coaching a client and, they're working through something and then I come and talk to you about it. But I want to be just really clear that I don't have it all figured out. I know some shit for sure. And I know how to get things done in a lot of areas and ways. And also I'm just like y'all, right? It's we had that podcast a few weeks ago called It's Not You, It's We, right? It's we're all kind of doing the same stuff a lot of time and trying to meet each other and connect with other people and feel good about ourselves and navigate our own inner emotional landscape and all the things. So I wanted just to tell y'all that. And I think it really leads into this week's podcast too, because what I want to talk to y'all about is privacy and authenticity. So something I see a lot is that people really want to be authentic. And there's all this stuff about how being authentic is so important. And listen, I do think it's important to be authentic, but something I see happen sometimes is people think being authentic means they're not allowed to keep anything to themselves. And that gives me a little bit of pause. So last week on the podcast, we talked about changing your mind. And I referenced David Richo and his book, How to Be an Adult. And I'm going to reference it again because in addition to what I talked about last week, he also in that book talks about adults are allowed to keep things to themselves. And I think that when I read that in the book and Alex and I talked about it, because if you didn't listen to last week's episode, Alex gave me that book as a present because that's the kind of people we are, is we give each other books called How to Be an Adult by psychologists. And we're I love this, read it, right? That was Alex giving it to me. Anyways, so I think before that in my life, I kind of had this idea that like, if I am deeply connected to someone, I have to tell them everything. And especially, I think I had this idea, like if I'm in a relationship with somebody, like a romantic relationship, I have to tell them everything. Not like everything, like when I poop, but like everything, like everything that's related to them. Like if I were like on the street and I saw a stranger and thought they were attractive, I would like have to like confess that to the person I was dating. Otherwise, I was like hiding something from them. And I remember Alex like really being like, no, like I think you're like allowed to have your own private life. You're allowed to have your own private thoughts. Like you need that space to have like between you and yourself to like kind of simmer and sift through things, like think things over and like just let things exist there. And then you need the autonomy to be able to decide what to bring forth. And I was like, what? I did not know that that was something that I could have and that could be okay. And I think that's really interesting too, because I think it ties into like a lot of us have assumptions about what it means to be in a relationship, what it means to be in a good relationship, what it means to be a good partner in a relationship. Obviously, same thing about workplace, right? We have assumptions about like what it means to be good at our job, what it means to be good at relationships with others, blah, blah, blah. And so I had this assumption that like I had to tell the other person everything. And when Alex and I had an explicit conversation and we had like also the book and the contents of the book to discuss, I kind of got this other viewpoint and we were able to like have an agreement together where I was like, oh, I'm allowed to have this space for me to like privately think my thoughts. And like, she knows I have that. And I know that she has that. And like, that's not for her. Like, she was like, that's not debatable. Like, she just gets to have that. So I was like, oh, I get to have it too. And I mean, like, relationships are made up of agreements between two people. So like, you get to decide for yourself. But I actually think it is really important now that like Alex shared that idea with me. I'm reading about it in the David Rico book and really giving myself that space the last, I guess like 5 years. I do think it's really important. And it's important to be able to balance, like I bring my authenticity to the relationship. I bring my true being to the relationship. And also I'm allowed to have things that are just for me. And just because I have something that's just for me doesn't mean I'm like lying or like keeping a secret, stuff like that. Although there have been times when she's like asked a question and I'm like, what do I say? Because like, I don't want to lie. I'm like, that's not really who I want to be as a person. But I'm like, oh, this is my private information. So sometimes I'm like, I don't want to share that, which feels so uncomfortable to me. Like I was not like socially conditioned to say like, I don't want to share that, like, and have that feel okay. So like, I'll be honest with you, it doesn't always feel okay to like say that. I'm like, oh, like I feel like so many uncomfortable emotions, like I'm going to spontaneously combust. But you know what? I don't spontaneously combust. And the more I do that, the more I get better at it. And then we can also like have a dialogue around that. I think so many people don't realize that they're allowed to have limits. And it's like them, like boundaries are such a big thing now. Like they're so popular and talked about like on the internets. And I think that's because so many people, it's just like never been modeled to them that they can just be like, that's private information and I don't want to share that with you. And so then they overgive and overgive and overgive. And then that feels terrible. They feel resentful. And then they have to go learn about boundaries. Anyways, I'm a little bit off topic. So authenticity and privacy. So what I kind of wanted to offer to you is like, where in your life are you giving more authenticity than you want to because you think that's what you have to do to be a good person, to be good at your job, to be a good partner, to be a good parent, to be a good whatever. And like, where are you not giving yourself permission to have privacy where you'd really like privacy? And how would you need to think about things in order to be able to give yourself the privacy that you would like? Now, of course, this goes both ways too. And like, you may be giving yourself a lot of privacy and maybe you're a person who wants to be giving more authenticity and that feels really vulnerable. It's so interesting, isn't it, that both of them can feel vulnerable. Like being authentic can feel super vulnerable, but being private and telling someone else like that you're going to keep something private to yourself, that can also feel super vulnerable. It's almost like being a human is going to feel pretty difficult no matter what you do. I'm making a joke because obviously I teach that. And I've really found it to be true in my own life too. So when I'm teaching this concept, like in coaching calls, a lot of times the first example I do use is like, someone's like, oh, do I like have to tell my significant other this thing, but like, I don't want to. And I'm like, well, do you tell them every time you poop? And people always look at me like I'm fucking nuts. Because first of all, I'm doing something taboo. I'm breaking a social norm by talking about pooping. But second of all, many people feel very comfortable keeping information about pooping super private. And a lot of people like won't even admit they poop if you talk to them directly, right? When Alex and I started dating, I remember like I only talk about pooping because my best friend Monet talks about pooping. And like that's not a secret because if you've ever followed her on Twitter, she is always talking about how like she has poop tweets, like she'll tweet about pooping and then like see which followers leave, right? So that's what made me comfortable talking about it. But when Alex and I started dating, she was not comfortable. And I like mentioned it and she like looked at me like I was insane, right? That was her privacy. She didn't want to talk about that shit with me. So again, it can kind of go both ways and people are allowed to have their privacy. But when you're thinking about like, forcing yourself to be more authentic or show more than you want to, I think this is a good example because like, there's been so many times like where I'm not going to tell, like even like I'm pretty comfortable talking about pooping. I'm talking to you about it now, but there's a lot of people in front of whom I'm not going to say like, oh, I have to go poop, right? I'm going to say like, oh, I need to go to the bathroom, or I'm going to say like, something else to like allow me to get out of the situation, like so that I can go do that. And that is something where I think, again, people feel more comfortable like having privacy. And so I love that example because if there's somewhere else in your life where like you want to hold something private, but like you don't feel comfortable thinking about it through the lens of like, bodily functions might be something that allows you to see like there are certain times when we don't give people all the information and we're allowed to do that without like it being that we're like lying or misrepresenting. Now, here's the thing. Only you get to decide like what the line is. Only you get to decide what goes into the privacy bucket and what goes into the authenticity bucket. And if this is something you've been struggling with, it might be interesting to like kind of just make two lists of like, what do I keep private currently and what do I share currently? And then I would look at those lists and say like, is there anything I'm sharing that I actually really don't want to share? Is there anything I'm keeping private that I actually really don't want to keep private, right? And then it comes down to like, if there's something you're sharing that you want to keep private, like what's the plan for that, right? Do you need new thought? Like, it's okay to keep this information private. Like I'm allowed, that's part of being an adult is that I'm allowed to keep this information private. Or is it like you need a plan? Like when someone asks you XYZ question, you like have some kind of pre-written response of what you're going to say so that you don't just like answer them. Like I'm very much like a talking talkerton, as you probably know from listening to me on the podcast. So like if someone asks me a question, if I haven't thought ahead of time about what I'm going to say, I'll just probably tell them like every single thought I'm having in my head, even if I didn't mean to. Like this actually happens to me all the time where someone will say something, I'll go like, blah, 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 right? And like, later, I'm like, I didn't need to say all those words. I could have kept some of that private, right? And maybe even I wanted to keep some of it private, but I wasn't prepared enough to actually then do that because it's my default, which let me be clear here. I don't think a default is necessarily a natural state, although I think that's what a lot of other people would say. But since we all have social conditioning and since we were all taught to be how we are, we didn't just choose, probably some combination of, choosing and being taught. I think that's my default state, not my natural state. I don't think something that I've been doing for 20, 30, 40 years is necessarily more natural than something I could teach myself to do now because it's the collection of, what I've inferred, what I've been taught, and how I've been based on past decisions. And I don't necessarily see that as being natural. Okay, that was a caveat and an aside. So if you are sharing more than you want to, and you want to not share something, what new thoughts do you need to have? What feelings of discomfort probably do you need to be able to tolerate? What's your plan for tolerating those? And then like, what do you want to do differently and plan that out ahead of time and maybe even rehearse it so that you're able to do it. And then also the opposite, right? If there's something you're keeping private that you want to share, what's the new thought you're going to need? Like, it's okay to talk about money because money is another taboo topic. It's obviously not taboo around here. I talk about money all the time, but for a lot of people in like quote unquote, like polite, company, it's like very taboo. And even a lot of people's families, like people just don't talk about money, which I think has a lot of negative results. So like maybe let's say in this example, you want to talk about money, right? So you might need new thought, like it's okay to talk about money. Again, what's going to happen with the feelings, right? You're probably going to need to be able to feel uncomfortable and do something anyways. Anytime we're like learning to do a new action that we're not already doing, we're generally probably going to need to be able to tolerate the feeling of discomfort. That's usually like the price of admission. All discomfort is not created equally. If you're tolerating discomfort, make sure you're tolerating it in alignment with your values and who you want to be. Don't just tolerate discomfort for discomfort's sake. That's also how we get ourselves in like situations we don't want to be in. So don't do that. And then again, if you want to share something you've been keeping private, right? What new thoughts do I need? How am I going to tolerate the sensation of emotional discomfort that's going to come up for me? And then what's my plan for how I do that, right? Do you need a script? Just like we might need a script to not share things we want to keep private, we might need a script to share things we want to start sharing because, again, it's not our default and it's not our practiced way of being to do that. So it's not going to like roll off the tongue or quote unquote come naturally. Usually when people say something comes naturally, what they actually mean is they've done it a lot of times before. So it's actually more like it's practiced, right? So if you don't have practice at something and it won't quote unquote come naturally, the way you build that for yourself is by practicing. Right? Write it out ahead of time, practice saying it 5 or 6 or 10 or 12 or 48 or 50,000 times, right? Find a friend that you feel comfortable being silly with and practice with them, practice in front of the mirror, record yourself practicing like on a video, Zoom by yourself, whatever you need to do. And then also, of course, a caveat, right? At the end of the day, like you're an adult and you get to do whatever the fuck you want for whatever reason you want. So you get to decide what you want to share and you get to decide what you want to keep private, right? You get to choose when you're being authentic and what being authentic means to you and when you're being private and what being private means to you. And also what I want you to think about is not just like what you want to do, but who you want to be and what your like values are and what your intention is. Because like sometimes we'll be like, well, I feel like I should tell my partner this, but I don't want to tell my partner that, right? But it's like, but who do you want to be as a partner? Do you want to be the kind of partner who talks about that shit or not, right? Because it can really go either way. Like, I don't know, like maybe you made a bet with your friends and lost a lot of money and you don't want to tell your partner. And so you're like, oh, Corey said I can keep this private, which like, again, you're an adult, so you can, but is keeping it private, is that in alignment with who you are? Is it in alignment with who you want to be? Is it in alignment with your values? And is it in alignment with the agreements you and your partner have made about money, right? So what I'm basically saying, to be super fucking clear, is don't take this teaching and use it as permission to violate your own values or to violate who you're trying to become. This teaching, like all teachings on the podcast, is for you, not to be used against you, right? So it's for you to become the person you want to become and to give yourself permission to become that person. And honestly, a lot of what we do on the podcast is about you trying to do super fucking hard, uncomfortable things so that you can be that person. So everything I'm talking about here, some of it is about being more comfortable in that it's about coming more into alignment with who you want to be and how you want to live your life and not living your life according to like, whatever culture says you should be. But often it actually means having more uncomfortable conversations and feeling more uncomfortable and doing more difficult things, because generally that actually is what's in alignment with your satisfied as fuck life. So another way to say this is like, I'm talking about you building habits and patterns for the long term, not what's just going to be easiest for you today on a Wednesday. I feel like I'm giving y'all a little bit of a lecture and a rant right now, so I apologize, but I can just see this information being kind of taken sideways, and I want to make sure it's not. I mean, listen, do whatever you want because, again, you're an adult, but I want to be very clear about where I stand, which is that like, this is to help you become who you want to be and to show up in the way you want to show up and to give yourself permission both to be wildly authentic and loved as the wildly authentic version of you, and to also give you permission to keep some things private and have some things that are just for you if that's actually in alignment with your deepest values and what you would like to have happen and part of like your satisfying as fuck life. Okay, this sounds like a super basic teaching, but I actually think it's pretty deep. So if it doesn't make sense to you or you're struggling with it, that's okay. Listen to some other podcasts and come back, or like listen to it multiple times. And if you want to talk about it more deeply with me, this is exactly the kind of shit that we talk about in one-on-one coaching. And it's exactly the kind of shit we talk about in SAF. And we have another round of SAF coming up in the fall. And I would love to have you in it. Or if you would rather, have more of a private coaching, you want to keep more things private, then I would love to coach you one-on-one as well. So scoot on over to my website, sign up for a consult call, and let's talk all about what's going on in your life and what you want to have going on in it, what would be like just fucking insanely delicious. And then let's make a plan to make it happen. All right, y'all, that's what I have for you this week. Thank you and have a great week. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to Love Your Job Before You Leave It. We'll have another episode for you next week. And in the meantime, if you're feeling super fired up, head on over to CoreyLynn.com for more guidance and resources.